It is a pleasure to see you again, and hope you had a great weekend. And let's start off, from the last class when you were talking about innovation and different ways um, of leveraging the growth of an economy. And it was very interesting to see that whatever is laying out there is actually a reflection of philosophers and economists thought out years and years ago. And I know it's a little bit challenging to deal with a lot of innovations, but it gotta be feasible. It gotta be feasible, it gotta be comprehensible, and people gotta accept it. So that's one of the main causes. And as you can see today, we are experiencing a little bit of a problem in the tech industry right now. You guys heard about the Silicon Valley Bank? Or know what is happening right now? Huh? Well, it's one of the banks that was actually loaning credit to some startups, and especially credits that is allocated, to green projects. But there was also, the regular retail banking. And a couple of days ago, because of, a very cash poor statement from the bank, people started, getting a little bit worried, and the bank saw a hurt behavior, with all the money, flowing out of the current accounts, and actually made the bank bankrupted. And right now the state is actually thinking about bailing out, because other banks might be involved and might be at risk, in the sense that it can be contaminated, very similar, very, the same way that happened with the subprime crisis. So that's something, all those type of crises we've been seeing a little bit more frequent than we used to. But, regulators gotta be, aware of, all those entanglements, all those relationships, that evolves all banks and their providers and their clients, so that, the whole system would be not so fragile as we see right now. And that's a bit of a challenging, especially when you're talking about, policy making, and, the welfare of, lots of people who have, bank accounts. So that's, let's say, the drawback of the technology part, because sometimes they run out of funds and they need to leverage that somehow. They need to pitch for more money, and sometimes the money is not enough there in the market, and then they can be at risk. So that being said, there is the other spectrum, of the economy, which is moving from one side to the other extreme. And that extreme, we are talking about Karl Marx. We're talking about this great thinker, this great philosopher, not only Karl Marx, but Marx Engels. And they decided to understand, the whole system, not only economic system, the political system, the social system, as a unit. And that made him give the first steps, what we know as Marxism, and later on as developed to to what we call communism. And those steps were very interesting, in the sense that it's a different way of looking the economy. And that's what I want to share with you guys, just to have an idea of what I'm talking about. And you guys can see my screen. Yeah. Okay. Awesome. So Marx is actually well known for, creating what we call it, this beacon of 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 the of economics, which is the Capital, the book Capital. Um, he decided to understand a little bit more about the relationship between, employees or the labor force versus, the owners of the companies, and how they're dealing with this, this relationship that is a little bit of a submissive versus um, dominant behavior. And by the time of he started creating and analyzing, this vassal relationship, there was a lot of, social turmoils at the time. And he decided to see, look, uh, what is happening right now, especially during this capitalist area, is, people are getting poor and poor, and they're suffering from misery. They're suffering, from this abusing relationship, and this is very unhealthy for the labor force. And in that sense, it kind of produced uh, a bit of instability, because they're seeing no way out. So the only avenue to follow was, to confront the system, to confront the political system, to confront these means of production. And in that way, he started, drafting, this understanding, or this comprehensive book about the working class, about the social class and the social battle. That was called the Manifesto of the Communist Party. And that at that time, they referred that book, or that rules, as a scientific communism, in the sense that they they wanted to see, all all workers united, to have this immense bargaining force in order to throw, to overthrow the capitalism out of the scene. So he actually starting, to describe this movement as a way to a new stage of human being, of human behavior, of human relationship, and that capitalism was not the only way out. It was actually just, another failed mean of production, that could be somehow substitute to another one that is fair, that had more, that was more fair, that was, more equal to everybody, to the whole population. And that's when they start, grabbing material, tying up studies about how can you understand a little bit more, how can you create this equal society that everyone actually was longing for. And the thing that he did was, specifying how production was actually made, the whole input and the production process and the output output, how the works were laboring, during the whole process. And he decided to divide it up into two modes. One mode was what they call it the infrastructure, which is this micro level. And then there was the macro level that they call it the superstructure, right? And those structures work together in a way that shaped our relationships in society, and also the political system, and all the system of beliefs of us, of the whole population. And he called it, in a very interesting way, material forces of production. Like, we need to you were obliged, to follow all those steps to be successful, that have more productivity, even at the cost of your health. And this is a way that he started, to understand a little bit about this conflict, this telling people that this relationship is really it's not good, because it's actually evolving to an equal relationship, to a relationship of power. And the idea is that how could he dismantle this whole vicious circle, this whole domestic labor. And a way to do that is to really break this relationship between the production level and the owner of the company through what? Through a unit, through what we call it today, through a union, right? So that's when this idea of asking for better work environment, better wages, was a way to minimize this dominant relation. And the solution is that well, if you want to have a better life, you gotta fight for it. You gotta organize yourself and try to to have this power to to have better benefits and to have better ways of life. So he was looking a way that society could be organized, and could be and that the class struggle could be somehow the engine of this organization that would confront, all the companies, this idea of working 60 hours a week and always having to profit, and not sharing the profit to the workers and to the population. So the central conflict is a way to understand, how capitalists and workers were actually in disagreement and trying to, to gain strength by overpowering or outpowering one another. And the thing is that it kind of he actually studied the capitalism very, he did dive, into the workforces of capitalism, and saw that, the capitalism was actually creating concentration and centralization of the capital, of all the resources. It was actually, having the power, not only the money, but also the assets that were actually involved in that was actually, being developed in the production process. And that was, that created a little bit of a dependency, and somehow it kind of created sectors, industrial sectors and supply chains that, were more specified or specializing one resources, And those relationships were actually coming together and being more stronger than the labor force itself. And this would be somehow would be a coercion, to the laborers. It would be a coercion to, to the labor force. And Marx saw that as very problematic because he thought, well, if you're dealing with division of labor, we are actually, exhausting all the possibilities of identity and interest, of this labor force. It's like you're putting in a box and you stay in that box until you die. And that was bad for, he saw that as um, a bad behavior or a bad way of dealing, with people's skills. And other concern, that he had was the specialization, because you were specialized, you were somehow specialized in a way that you could no longer get out of if you start, carving out more specialization up to the point that, we will have the only thing we will know will be that specific topic, and you won't have, the holistic idea or having a more general approach to work. And this is actually a way to, to the companies to, to control and have power of all the, of all these, of all this workforce. So this is what he calls the dimension of governance, between firms, between industries and states. This is a state in a nation-wide definition. So he kind of thought, well, the class was actually underestimated, and in a way that it was creating some kind of myopia and possibility of transformation. And in that sense, what was wrong, according to Marx, was that the whole engine of capitalism was actually rest upon the idea that market would regularize or would be, would be self-contained or would be the solution for all the problems. And then he denied it, saying, look, we cannot rely only and solely, on the market forces, So he started, to move away from this market, to be a little bit more, to understand a little bit more what they call it planning economics. That is, you gotta organize the economy so that anyone could have access to all the goods and services in the same way. So in that sense, he started, to deconstruct this idea of free market and construct the idea of a centralized economy. He's starting to see the economy as a bottom-up, dynamics, or bottom-up, ways, or better saying, understand how, he can manage, all people in need, or everyone that works, could have the same access as the one that was in the top of the pyramid. So the idea is that everyone should be entitled to properties, should be entitled to have gains, should be entitled to have, to own its to own its, you know, its production process, or to own its the products of this production process. And one thing that he actually believed, you know, is that not only the market was the worst solution, but also the hierarchy was not good at all. So everyone should be in the same level and should have the same, you know, treatment to everything, so that it won't have any type of, you know, inequality. And in that sense, he started exploring other ways of political systems and economical systems. And he understood that there was these asymmetries between, you know, the ones who have power, the ones who have, you know, the control. And he decided to say, look, if you shape those things in a way that you can make a little bit less unstable, that in my work, you know, we might get out of this a better society. And that's, you know, what was one of the scopes of, you know, the capital. And one interesting thing is that what I see today, you know, there was, is still, you know, a question that everybody is trying to understand and answer. How can you minimize, you know, the this inequality in our society? How can it be minimized so that we cannot suffer, you know, in the future, or you cannot ask, you know, that we can have access to all the resources and to all the goods and to all the services that we need, and somehow the state could also be able to, you know, to respond to that needs when we ask for it. So that was one interesting thing. And for him, a variable that played, that was central to him, was uncertainty. And if you're dealing with certainty, we're dealing with stability, and having this plan you know, have this plan economy would somehow minimize or even vanish this instability, because everybody will know exactly what they're going to get at the end of the line. So,
oh no, I was looking for better. Yeah. I don't think he's here.
oh, someone is with the mic open.
It's because,
right? So so in doing so, questions, and many of the questions identified by Marx, you know, could not be answered in the framework that he actually provided to us. One of them is that how can we actually exchange between economies, you know, between all the economies, you know, around the world, and how, you know, things are governed, you know, to shape, you know, the different specializations or to different innovations that would take place, you know, at some point. And that being said, you know, there was this lacking, this kind of gap in his theory that started, you know, to being questioned, you know, by other philosophers and by other economists at the time. And one of them decided to say, look, is Marxism, you know, capable of, you know, characterize the dynamics of, you know, economic development, you know, in an accurate way? And that's the main question that, you know, people, you know, years after he wrote The Capital, you know, start, you know, to criticize and to, you know, to confront it in some way. So basically, he narrowed down the conception of unitary, of unity, to a more social historical transformation that was actually, being developed in a way that contradicts, the relationship between property, between classes, between production, between markets, and that contradictions were the main criticism of other philosophers who actually started to say, started to call themselves as pragmatism in opposed to, to Marxism, in a way that pragmatism was a little bit more sympathetic to the idea that, all the systems, it's very it's very complicated. They have very complicated connections, and that being said, it could, be difficult to understand if you're not, let's say, open, to some different interaction with some different scenarios, or as they call it, if some enlightenment ambitions, or understanding of new emergent social systems. So they were a little bit more flexible to the idea of neither, free market nor the kind of planned market would suffice to, to understand all the social relationships that we have in this world. And those pragmatists were following the idea of Darwin, of social, that people were actually evolving throughout time, and because of that, we are getting a little bit more stronger as we adapt to this new world, to this new social world. And that was kind of multi-layered, always dynamic, and and casual relationships, as they call it. It's not only a casual relationship across space when you're talking about geographical, limitations, but also across time, between one century to the other. And for example, today, as you see from this, the evolution of, the Silicon Valley, and right now he's starting, the Silicon Valley reached their climate, years ago, and right now what you're seeing is that somehow it's let's say its way to plummet, from this, from this high level that, it was, and he's starting to have some difficulties about, or facing some difficulties in terms of, stability, in terms of, understand a little bit more this new world post-COVID, so to speak. And right now, it's the curve that is set. You guys remember about the innovation curve that is set, that we talked about last week? So basically, you have the Silicon Valley emerging and reaching, to a point that was, its climate and was saturated up until now, and now it's becoming, to a little bit more going through a decadence, right? But in order to avoid, this kind of negative curve or negative slope, and it's, it requires new innovation. It requires, new boost of energy, so that we can understand a little bit more, about the resiliency of the tech, world. So, and then those, just, coming back to this pragmatists, they decided, well, we need to understand about the actors, and we need to understand about the frames we are creating so that the actors could play out, more freely into this market or into this world. And basically they decided to, such frames were actually engraved in a power that they work in, they have some kind of, mode of life, worldview or opinion or institutional order that, need to be adaptable. And all those process and all those events, when they are not correspondent to that expectation, we would have some kind of turmoil or upheaval into the whole environment, the entire environment. And you need to be able to face it and overcome it. So that was, let's say, the motto of those philosophers, so they kind of get together and start to reflect on it and have, look, to get out of this, you need to have creativity. You need to understand a little bit more about the social process. And then they decided to create this, this new approach that they call it, learning theory or holistic learning theory, because every time there works something, especially in a social system, and that is not matched or somehow it's not, it doesn't, it doesn't match our expectation, we need to be able to review it and to, and to understand it and to adapt it and to, to understand from the errors and try to do it and try to not do it again. So basically, as a way to say, look, we gotta be more flexible. We gotta be able to shape into different scenarios, and we gotta be able to, put more variables if you need it, and strike more variables if you need it, so that you can reach some kind of stability. And that was the orientation that could make democracy a more inclusive and a more, let's say, equal, political system that could attract, all the actors, regardless of their beliefs. And in that way, that would contrast with this kind of centralized, red tapes and, filling out forms or just, just following, some rules and regulations, and that cannot be somehow, bypassed, or something that could exclude, part of the society from those, from those axes, from the axis of getting, welfare, assistance, or some kind of, reduction of this, of the poverty, or reduction of these, this suffer, that people were at the time, especially when you're talking about, post-World War. And this would concentrate, all the societies to, to being able just to get exactly what they need. And that wouldn't be good, because we'd be limited, to all the goods and service that, was being produced there. So we need to do, to think bigger. And the answer for that is that the pragmatists say, look, let's emphasize in a different way. Let's emphasize, how can we learn? How can you learn from the errors? How can you have multiple possibilities, for transformation? And that was the central question, from him, from them. And the key, for those pragmatists was, let's share, all the specific, all the constant, all the context, all the historical, idiosyncrasies, with all those actors, and let's understand how they're entangled, and let's help them, you know, um, be better off in the future by identifying, and by responding in the right time, possible challenges that they could face in the near future. So that was this idea of being adaptable, of being evolutionary somehow. And that response would come out, from errors, or would come out from this consistency from our society, and from social identities that were not accepted at the time, that can be accepted now, or can be, or could be accepted in the future. So basically that was the whole idea of pragmatism. And guys, here's a question for you. Do you see this type of thinking in today's life? Are you guys pragmatic? Come on. Are you? Oh, don't leave me hanging. Come on, let's have one answer. Are you guys pragmatic? No? Okay. So basically, you know, this new orientation was actually giving rise, to this ambition, to this, to the way of constructing new forms of society and political governance. And this governance was actually, laid out, uh, possibilities for working class mobilization, in a way that they could, move from one class to the other, to climb up, to climb new social, uh, uh, new social developments, or they could actually be better off or well off, in the near future. And then there's, of course, this would actually be a little bit more democratic, or, in a way that everyone could, take advantage, of it, in terms of being better off socially, economically, and politically. And that's what we actually are seeing somehow in the last few years. But let's say up until 2010 onwards, 2015 onwards, we are seeing a little bit of a movement, a different movement from most of, political system. And this movement is actually kind of denying this idea of democratization, and going back to the idea of a centralized or more autocratic, situation that you see right now. And this is a kind of, this is something that you need to worry about, because when you're limiting, our access, to different, to different resources, or to different, to our freedom, we need to be aware that there's going to be there are going to be trade-offs in the future. So the pragmatics basically said, we got attention, to different levels of disruption, and also to the opportunities that, the social systems will gonna lead us. And for that, I'm gonna play this interesting film. Who likes Charlie Chaplin? Anyone? No one likes Charlie Chaplin. Oh, come on. Here's just a very quick, way of representing what's going on at the time. You guys can see my browser.
Yes.
My secret to beating sniff tricks? Secret dry spray. Fights odor and it's aluminum.
Oh, what just happened? Let me try this again. Sometimes it gets bugged. So this is, one of the most famous, works from Charlie Chaplin. So I'll ask you guys, what is the main concept of this, image of he tried to portray for us?
Was it like the means of production and like the factory line?
Exactly. So what he's actually criticizing about? What is the main thing that was, he was like, trying to exactly dangerous working conditions? What else? When he tries, like going crazy, trying to, you know, whirl all the screw and, playing with the bosses and the line of production. He's trying, what was he trying to portray there? This criticism also to the division of labor that can be also very, very unhealthy, to everybody, just doing the same thing, uh, all day, all week, all year round. It could somehow lead to some, to the gut, to this exhaustion, and that was interesting when you see that he's, going down the engine and going up again, because it's an engine. So if it stops and then it stops the whole production process, and then we don't have, the goods and services that is required to, and the company will eventually goes into bankruptcy, and at the cost of their labors. So a lot of stuff in a very short movie can be portrayed, and some of them, that Marx was actually, questioning, is this type of, um, of this real, of this environment, of this relationship that is so, unequal, between, everybody that is working in the process against the guy, the manager, who is in a very, in a room separately, and, just, shutting out comments and stuff like that, controlling the whole process. And according to him, it should be a little bit more, equalize, all the roles and jobs for that company, and not have this type of hierarchy that you actually need to respond to. And for him, this was actually the eventually, if everybody would get together and kind of have a more pressure, into the owner of the company, they could get a better work condition, they could get better wages, and they could get, better benefits, and that's the whole idea. And this idea could be transported somehow, to the whole economy, and not only to stay in the micro level, but also to be to have a response from the macro level, to have a response from government. And if the government would work something more, or would enforce something to be more equal and more planned, people would would be more beneficial, to the whole population, and would have, this pyramid that is so, so focused on the top, and everybody is practically out of the market when it goes down to the bottom, would actually shorten this pyramid, and everyone would be a little bit more equalized, with differences between wages and between work conditions and between, profits would be minimal, so that, no one would have to engage in, informal work, or to have second jobs or anything like that, that could put in jeopardy any life. So according to him, this would be more healthier and a more equal society. Do you guys agree with that? Huh? Do you think it's a good idea? So basically, for our third assignment, I'm gonna ask you guys, looking at, the Charles Chaplin film, the short video, and look how we are today. Can you see any resemblances? Can you see any similar visions that we are actually in the same, in the same, not way, but we actually doing the same thing all along these years, that we didn't evolve enough to have, a better quality of life versus, working life. And that's something that we need to think of, and that's something that COVID actually posed to us. And right now, one of the main questions, or one of the main requirements in the job market, is to have a more flexibility and to be more equal. So have a, equal opportunities. So that, let's try to think about it and to connect the ideas to what's happening today, and try to, to have a more critical view about those new thoughts and, new ways of life. All right. So just for you, I'm gonna create, as usual, a PDF of all those questions for the third assignment, and you guys can handle me also through email in 2 weeks, as usual. And if you have any doubts, just give me a shout. And next week we are gonna meet in person, as usual, at our our classroom and 102. So guys, I wish you a wonderful week, and I see you everyone next week in Calexico. Thank you, Jaden. You can send me email, Ronaldo. Thank you. Goodbye.